In his younger days, Billy Crystal was working as an usher for a show called You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. One night, he noticed that the famous news anchor Walter Cronkite was there in the theater. Wanting to impress, he went over to where he was sitting and whispered to him, "Mr. Cronkite, you just let me know if I can do anything to make you feel more comfortable here." "Well," said Walter Cronkite, "you can start by getting that flashlight out of my face." A light is meant to allow us to see, but a light shining in the wrong direction has exactly the opposite effect. If you have ever driven west on the freeway as the sun is about to set, you know what I mean. You can't see a thing and you can't read the exit signs. A lantern, or in modern times a flashlight, allows us to walk without stumbling, provided it is shining at our feet. But if it is shining in our face, it causes us to stumble and fall, because it prevents us from seeing anything. You are the light of the world. But it matters a great deal how that light is held. All too often, religious people try to hold it themselves, and they hold it completely wrong. A light held humbly at the feet of the world lets the world see the path. A light in the face does nothing but blind. By such an in-your-face attitude, religious people throughout history have actually prevented others from seeing. There is no dearth of holier-than-thou religious people who do far more harm than good. Every once in a while, however, we find a truly enlightened person, a genuinely humble person, a real light to the world. Such a person is a lamp for our feet, draws people to the light, helps us to walk through life without stumbling. In the 13th century, the world was home to two extraordinary people. One was the Sultan of Egypt, Malik al-Kamil. The other was a humble friar whom we know as Francis of Assisi. At that time, the world was at war, as it has been at almost every time in history. The Christian forces of Europe were moving against the Muslim forces of Egypt. The Sultan was a very wise, learned, and spiritual man. Francis, too, was a very enlightened, wise, and spiritual man. He crossed the battle lines and walked right into the enemy camp. Propaganda had portrayed the Sultan as a beast, but Francis knew better and had no fear. He walked fearlessly into the Sultan's camp and asked to be taken to al-Kamil. When the learned Sultan saw this barefoot man of God coming from the enemy camp, he recognized in him the light of God. "May God give you peace," said Francis in greeting. Now to us, these words may not seem surprising, but in the Middle Ages, peace was not a greeting and certainly not a way of life. One town was always battling against the next town. There were always feuds between cities, between states, between families. Francis's Italy was no exception. The Sultan recognized in Francis's heartfelt words the greeting of his own people, "Salam alaikum," peace be with you. And he welcomed Francis as a friend. For the next days, Francis and the Sultan carried on an amazing conversation. The Sultan allowed Francis to preach to the troops and to the court. The two conversed about peace, about religion, about God's will, about the love of God. And each saw in each other a true friend. This would have been remarkable in any era of history. But during the time of the Crusades, it was unthinkable. At the end of the visit, the Sultan tried to shower Francis with lavish gifts of silver and gold and silk, but Francis refused everything. He did, however, sit down to a farewell meal with the Sultan. Every church should have an icon of that incredible moment. Francis took to heart Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. He allowed the light to shine. Many others of his day were burying that light under the bushel baskets of greed and thirst for power. Not Francis. He came with his message of peace and love, for the light of Christ was truly burning in his heart. He was a light to the world, and he remains so. St. Francis had tried to bring that same light to his own people, but to no avail. Cardinal Pelagius was leading the troops. There's already something so very wrong in a cardinal being a general. Francis begged the cardinal to make peace. The Sultan had already sent the most generous peace terms possible, but greed prevented the Western powers from accepting peace, and they would not listen to Francis. Their light was buried under the bushel basket of other motives. In Francis, the light was shining brightly, humbly, and therefore effectively. At the end of their meeting, the Sultan asked Francis always to pray for him, that he might always follow the will of God. Francis retained a deep respect and love for that great man his whole life long. When the Sultan died, even the emperor in the West wept publicly because of his great love for this extraordinary man. It is not ours to hold the light. It is ours to be the light and allow God to hold us. Let us, like Francis, shine brightly and humbly, that God may direct our light at the footsteps of others, so that walking in the ways of peace and love, they may find themselves walking with God.